"Ma'am, you need to step away, right now." The words sliced through the emergency room like a cold draft, sharp enough to turn heads, strong enough to stop motion, and for a brief second, the entire hallway seemed to freeze under the sterile white lights reflecting off polished tile floors that smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats. And Ava Johnson stood there, just past the check-in line, her fingers still lightly gripping the edge of a gurney, as if letting go would mean giving up on something far more important than herself, her voice calm but firm, almost too steady for someone being told she didn't belong. "He needs immediate attention," she said, her eyes not leaving the man lying there, his breathing uneven but still present, still fighting, while across from her, Nurse Emily Carter straightened her posture with practiced authority, her badge catching the overhead light, her expression unreadable except for the flicker of irritation tightening her jaw. Because to her, this was not a moment of urgency. This was a disruption, an interruption in a system she believed she controlled, and the way she looked at Ava, quick, dismissive, measured in seconds, said everything without needing to raise her voice. "We have protocols," Emily replied coolly, her tone polished like glass. "And you are not authorized to interfere." And a few nearby staff exchanged glances, subtle, almost invisible, but enough to ripple through the space like a quiet judgment, because Ava didn't look like someone who belonged in decision-making spaces, not in this hospital, not in this moment, not dressed in a worn coat still damp from the rain outside where gray clouds pressed low over the city, and yet she didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She simply stood her ground with a kind of stillness that felt out of place in the chaos, like she was anchored to something deeper than the room itself. "Please," she said again, softer this time, but somehow stronger, "just check him." And for a fraction of a second, something shifted in the air, something almost imperceptible, like a hesitation that could have changed everything. But it didn't last, because Emily exhaled sharply, turning slightly to signal security with a small, practiced motion of her hand, the kind that came from years of making quick decisions without question. And just like that, the moment snapped back into place, the hum of machines, the distant echo of footsteps, the quiet murmur of conversations resuming as if nothing significant had just been said, and Ava felt the distance grow, not in feet, not in inches, but in something colder, something harder to measure, as if the space between being heard and being dismissed could stretch forever in a matter of seconds. And still, she didn't move right away, because something in her eyes remained steady, focused, as though this wasn't the end of the moment, just the beginning of something no one else in that hallway could yet see. The security guard's hand hovered just inches from Ava Johnson's shoulder, not rough, not forceful, but firm enough to signal the end of her place in that room. And for a moment, the world narrowed down to the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the faint rhythm of a heart monitor somewhere behind her, steady but fragile, like time itself waiting to see what she would do next. And Ava finally released her grip on the gurney, her fingers uncurling slowly, as if letting go required more strength. Then holding on, her gaze lingering on the patient for one last second before she stepped back without resistance, because she understood something no one else in that hallway did. This was not the moment to fight. Not yet. Not here. And as she moved toward the glass doors, the cold air from outside seeped in through the automatic sensors, brushing against her skin like a quiet reminder that the world beyond these walls was just as real as the one that had just rejected her. And behind her, Nurse Emily Carter had already turned away, her attention shifting seamlessly back to her routine, clipboard in hand, voice steady as she issued instructions that sounded efficient, controlled, unquestioned, as if the interruption had never happened at all. And a few bystanders glanced at Ava as she passed, their expressions unreadable, some curious, some indifferent, none willing to challenge what they had just witnessed, because it was easier to accept the system than to question it. And outside, the rain had not stopped, thin streams sliding down the glass facade of the hospital, distorting the reflection of the city lights into something blurred and distant. And Ava stepped just beneath the overhang, not fully out in the storm, not fully inside, caught between two worlds that did not seem to meet, her coat still damp, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged, as if nothing had been taken from her at all. And for a few seconds she simply stood there, eyes focused on nothing in particular, yet somehow taking everything in: the sound of passing cars, the faint echo of sirens in the distance, the quiet rhythm of rain tapping against concrete. Each detail settling into place like pieces of a larger picture no one else could see. And then, almost casually, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up her face with a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the cold gray of the afternoon. And her thumb hovered for just a moment before pressing a single contact. No hesitation, no doubt. And when the call connected, she did not raise her voice, did not rush her words. She simply spoke with the same calm certainty that had defined her every movement inside. "This is Ava Johnson," she said, her tone even, measured, undeniable. "Initiate full review protocol. Effective immediately." And on the other end there was a pause, not confusion, not delay, but recognition, the kind that carried weight, the kind that moved systems. And Ava ended the call just as quietly as she had made it, slipping the phone back into her pocket as if nothing extraordinary had just been set into motion. And behind the glass doors, unseen by most, subtle shifts were already beginning. A supervisor stepping out of an office, a phone ringing where it had been silent moments before, a glance exchanged between two administrators who suddenly looked less certain than they had a minute ago. And Ava remained where she was, still beneath that narrow strip of shelter, the rain continuing to fall just inches away, her reflection faint in the glass, steady, composed. Waiting, not for permission, not for validation, but for something inevitable to arrive. Inside the hospital, the rhythm had not changed at first. Monitors continued their steady beeping. Carts rolled across polished floors, and conversations resumed in low, controlled tones. But something subtle had shifted beneath the surface, something not loud enough to be heard, yet heavy enough to be felt. And Nurse Emily Carter sensed it before she could explain it. A faint tension threading through the routine she trusted so completely. Like a note slightly off in a song she had played 1,000 times, she adjusted the clipboard in her hands, her posture still precise, her steps still confident. But her eyes flicked once toward the glass doors where Ava had stood just moments ago, now empty except for streaks of rain trailing down the surface, and for reasons she could not name, she lingered on that spot half a second longer than necessary before turning back to her work. "Room 12 needs labs processed," she said to a passing technician, her voice even, yet the technician hesitated, just briefly, as if distracted by something else, already flagged. He replied, his tone uncertain, and that was when Emily noticed the first real disruption. A phone ringing at the main desk that no one immediately answered. Unusual in a place where every second was accounted for. Another nurse glanced at the screen, frowned, and picked it up with a cautious "front desk," her expression shifting as she listened. Not alarmed, not confused, but attentive in a way that suggested the call mattered more than most. And across the hallway, a door that was usually closed opened quickly, revealing a hospital administrator stepping out. His tie slightly loosened, his pace quicker than expected. He looked around as if searching for something specific, then checked his phone again, his brow tightening. "Has anyone seen Carter?" he asked, his voice low but urgent enough to carry. Emily straightened instinctively, stepping forward. "I am right here," she replied, and the administrator nodded, though his focus seemed divided, like he was balancing more than one thought at once. "Stay available," he said, before moving past her without further explanation. And now the shift was undeniable, not chaos, not disorder, but a recalibration, like a system quietly adjusting itself in real time. And Emily felt it in the way conversations paused just a fraction longer, in the way staff glanced at one another as if waiting for direction that had not yet been given. And still she held on to her sense of control, because nothing concrete had happened yet, nothing she could point to and say this is different. But then another phone rang, this time inside a private office, and the door closed behind it, voices muffled, urgent, and a few minutes later, a second administrator appeared, followed by a third, their movements purposeful, their expressions composed but alert, and one of them carried a tablet, scrolling quickly, stopping, scrolling again, as if verifying something that required immediate confirmation. And through it all, the patient Ava had tried to help was still being attended to, but now with a slightly different urgency. A doctor stepping in sooner than expected, instructions given more quickly, more carefully, as if the standard protocol had quietly been elevated without anyone announcing it. And Emily watched this unfold with a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with uncertainty, because the system she believed in was changing in front of her, not breaking, not failing, but shifting in a way she had not initiated, and that meant something else had, something unseen, something outside her control, and for the first time since she had put on her uniform that morning, she felt the faint edge of doubt press against her certainty, not enough to shake her, not yet, but enough to make her wonder what had just begun the moment Ava Johnson walked out those doors. The air inside the hospital tightened in a way that could not be explained by protocol or policy, a subtle pressure building beneath the surface as if every second carried more weight than the last. And Emily Carter felt it settle into her shoulders as she moved down the corridor, her steps still measured but no longer automatic, because now every glance from passing staff lingered just a little longer. Every conversation seemed to pause when she entered earshot, and though no one said anything directly, the shift was undeniable, like a current running beneath calm water, invisible yet impossible to ignore. And at the far end of the hall, the double doors opened again, not with urgency, but with intention, and a group of executives stepped inside, their presence immediately altering the tone of the room without raising a single voice. Their suits dark, their expressions composed, their eyes scanning the space with quiet authority, and one of them, a tall man with silver at his temples, checked his watch before speaking to the administrator beside him in a low voice that did not need to be loud to command attention. "She is on site," he said, and the words moved faster than any announcement, passing from one staff member to another in whispers that never fully formed into sentences, and Emily turned toward them instinctively, her grip tightening slightly around her clipboard, because this was not routine, this was something else entirely, something coordinated, deliberate, and for the first time, she felt herself reacting instead of leading, and the administrator who had spoken to her earlier returned, his pace quicker now, his tone more focused. "We need to review all intake decisions from the last hour," he said, not asking, not suggesting, but stating it as fact, and Emily blinked once, processing. "All of them?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with something new, something cautious, and he nodded without hesitation. "Effective immediately." And then he moved on, leaving her standing in the middle of a system that was suddenly being examined from the inside out. And around her, screens were being checked, files pulled up, names reviewed, details scrutinized with a level of attention that had not existed just minutes before. And Emily felt the edges of her certainty begin to shift, not collapse, not break, but bend under a pressure she could not yet define. And then, through the glass doors at the entrance, headlights cut through the gray afternoon, sharp and deliberate, illuminating the rain in streaks of white light, and one by one, black vehicles came to a smooth stop at the curb, engines quiet, doors opening in sequence, and even from where she stood, Emily could feel the change before she understood it, the kind of presence that did not announce itself loudly but arrived with undeniable weight. And the automatic doors slid open again, letting in a rush of cool air and something else, something quieter, more controlled. And as figures stepped inside, their pace unhurried, their posture assured, the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath without realizing it. And Emily's eyes moved toward the entrance, drawn not by noise, but by something deeper, something instinctive, as if the moment she thought had already passed was only now beginning to reveal what it truly was. The doors parted with a soft mechanical hum, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been, as if the entire building had quieted just enough to notice it. And every pair of eyes within range turned, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a subtle, shared awareness that something significant was unfolding. And Ava Johnson stepped inside without rushing, her coat now dry, her posture unchanged, her presence carrying a calm that did not ask for attention, yet commanded it all the same. And behind her, the executives who had arrived moments earlier fell into place naturally, not surrounding her, not leading her, but aligning with her in a way that made their roles unmistakably clear, and the man with silver at his temples moved half a step forward before stopping, allowing Ava to take the lead without a word exchanged, and the shift that had begun minutes earlier now settled fully into the room. No longer subtle, no longer uncertain, but real, tangible, undeniable, and Emily. Carter felt it the moment Ava crossed the threshold, a quiet tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition, though she did not yet understand what she was recognizing, and Ava's eyes moved through the space slowly, not scanning for approval, not searching for direction, but observing, taking in the arrangement of desks, the positioning of staff, the rhythm of movement that defined how this place functioned. And when her gaze passed over Emily, it did not linger with accusation or judgment. It simply acknowledged, as if marking a point in a sequence that was already in motion, and the administrator stepped forward again, his voice more formal now, carrying across the space with measured clarity. All department leads, please report to the main corridor immediately. And the words landed differently this time, not as a request, not as a routine instruction, but as a signal. And within seconds, the hallway began to fill, nurses, technicians, supervisors gathering with a quiet urgency, their expressions composed but attentive, and Emily remained where she was, her clipboard now held a little closer, her posture still upright, but no longer anchored in the same certainty, because the system she trusted was no longer centered around her decisions. It had shifted to something larger, something she could not yet define, and Ava stepped forward once more, her pace steady, her presence drawing the focus of the entire room without effort, and the man beside her spoke again, his tone respectful, almost deferential. The review has begun, he said, not to the room, but to her, and Ava gave a small nod, nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just an acknowledgement that carried authority in its simplicity, and then she looked around, not at the crowd as a whole, but at the space itself, the place where decisions were made, where people were evaluated in seconds, where value was assigned without question, and for a brief moment, the silence deepened, not empty, not passive, but full, like a breath held just before something changes, and Emily felt it more than anyone, because she stood at the center of where that change was about to land, her thoughts moving faster now, replaying the moment at the entrance, the words she had chosen, the decision she had made, each detail sharpening with new clarity, and though no one had spoken directly to her, yet she understood something with growing certainty. The moment she believed she had controlled was now being examined from an entirely different perspective, and as Ava finally came to a stop in the middle of the corridor, the entire room seemed to align around her presence, not through force, not through command, but through something quieter and far more powerful, the undeniable weight of authority that did not need to be announced to be felt. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they were unsure of what to say, but because something deeper had taken hold of the space, a stillness that pressed gently against every sound, every movement, until even the quiet hum of machines seemed distant, and Ava Johnson stood at the center of it all, her hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm, her breathing steady, as if she had all the time in the world, while around her, the staff waited without realizing they were waiting there. Attention drawn not by instruction but by presence alone, and the man beside her glanced down at the tablet in his hand before stepping forward half a pace, his voice low but clear enough to carry across the corridor. Initial findings confirm multiple intake discrepancies within the last hour, he said, and the words landed with quiet precision, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough to shift the weight of the room. And a few staff members exchanged glances, subtle, almost instinctive, as if trying to measure their own place within what was being revealed, and Emily Carter felt it most of all, the slow tightening of realization as each second stretched just a little longer than it should have, her grip on the clipboard steady but no longer effortless, because now every detail from earlier replayed in her mind with a clarity she had not noticed in the moment, the tone of her own voice, the certainty in her decision, the dismissal that had felt routine at the time, and yet now it no longer felt routine. It felt exposed, and Ava took a single step forward, not abrupt, not forceful, but enough to draw every eye toward her. And when she finally spoke, her voice was not raised, not sharpened, but measured, controlled, carrying a quiet authority that did not need volume to be heard. Every patient who walks through these doors trusts this place with something they cannot afford to lose, she said, her gaze moving across the room, not settling on any one person, yet reaching all of them at once. And that trust is not built on assumptions. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was reflective, as if each person present was being given a moment to consider what those words meant beyond policy, beyond protocol, beyond routine. And somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily, grounding the moment in something real, something immediate. And Ava's eyes shifted then, slowly, deliberately, until they met Emily's, not with accusation, not with anger, but with a clarity that felt more powerful than either, as if she was seeing not just the action, but the pattern behind it, the system that allowed it to happen without question. And Emily held that gaze for a second longer than she expected to, her posture still straight, her expression controlled, but something beneath it had changed, something quieter, more uncertain. And the administrator stepped in again, his voice softer now, almost careful. We have already initiated a full audit of intake procedures, he said, and Ava gave a slight nod, acknowledging the statement without breaking the moment. And for a brief second, the entire hospital seemed suspended between what it had been and what it was about to become, the past still visible in every routine motion, the future already moving into place through unseen decisions. And Ava stood at that intersection without hesitation, her presence steady, her silence intentional, as if she understood that the most powerful shift was not in what had already happened, but in what everyone in that room was beginning to realize about it. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like a room adjusting to a truth it could no longer ignore. And Ava Johnson let that silence settle before she spoke again, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, as if she had already seen this moment long before anyone else in that corridor realized it had arrived. And when her voice came, it was calm, precise, leaving no space for doubt. This hospital changed ownership at 9 o'clock this morning, she said, and the words landed without force, yet carried more weight than anything that had been said before, moving through the room in a wave that no one could stop. And for a brief second, no one reacted, not because they did not understand, but because they did, completely, and the meaning of it needed time to reach every corner of the space. And then the man beside her stepped forward, confirming what no one had expected. Ms. Johnson is the sole owner and acting director as of today, he added, his tone formal, definitive. And the shift that followed was immediate, not chaotic, not loud, but absolute, as if the entire structure of authority had been quietly rearranged in a single breath. And Emily Carter felt it more than anyone, the ground beneath her certainty no longer steady, her thoughts racing back to the entrance, to the moment she had raised her hand, to the decision that had felt so routine, so justified, now standing in sharp contrast to the reality unfolding in front of her. And her fingers tightened slightly around the clipboard before she realized she was holding it too hard, and she loosened her grip, but the tension remained, not in her hands, but in the space between what she had believed and what she now faced. And Ava's eyes moved across the staff once more, not searching, not questioning, simply acknowledging, as if she was taking note of each person present, each role, each responsibility. And when her gaze returned to Emily, it lingered just long enough to make the moment unmistakable. Not a confrontation, not a call out, but a quiet recognition of cause and consequence. And Emily felt her breath steady as she straightened slightly, not out of defiance, not out of confidence, but out of instinct, because something in her understood that this moment would define more than just a single decision. It would define how she stood when everything she assumed was certain had shifted. And Ava took one more step forward, closing the distance just enough to make her presence undeniable. And for a second, the entire hospital seemed to narrow to that single line of sight, the fluorescent lights reflecting softly off the floor, the distant sounds fading into the background, leaving only the weight of what had just been revealed. And then Ava spoke again, her tone unchanged, steady, measured. The way we treat people here does not change based on how they look when they walk through that door, she said, and there was no anger in her voice, no accusation, only clarity, the kind that made it impossible to misunderstand. And around them, the staff stood still, absorbing every word, every implication, every shift in meaning, because this was no longer about a single interaction. It was about the system itself, and the realization of that settled into the room like a final piece falling into place, quiet, undeniable, and impossible to reverse. No one moved at first, not because they were unsure of what to do, but because the weight of what had just been said had settled too deeply to ignore, and Ava Johnson did not rush to fill that silence. She let it exist, let it stretch just long enough for every person in that corridor to feel it fully, to understand that this moment was not about punishment, not about reaction, but about something far more deliberate. And when she finally spoke again, her voice remained calm, steady, carrying the same quiet authority that had reshaped the entire room. "This is not about a single mistake," she said, her eyes moving slowly across the staff, not stopping, not accusing, simply acknowledging. "This is about a pattern that has been allowed to exist without question." And the words landed differently this time, deeper, more personal, because they did not isolate one person, they reflected something larger, something embedded in the way decisions had been made long before this moment. And Emily Carter felt it clearly now, the shift from individual action to collective responsibility. And for the first time, her posture softened, not collapsing, not weakening, but adjusting, as if she was no longer standing behind a role, but within a reality she had not fully seen before. And Ava took a slow breath, not out of hesitation, but out of intention, her presence grounded, her gaze unwavering. "From this point forward, no patient will be evaluated based on assumption," she continued. And there was a quiet finality in her tone, not harsh, not forceful, but absolute. "Every case will be reviewed with care, with attention, and with respect, regardless of appearance, background, or circumstance." And somewhere behind the crowd, a nurse shifted slightly, as if those words had reached a place she did not expect, and the administrators beside Ava nodded subtly, already aligning with the direction she was setting, not as a reaction, but as confirmation of something already decided. And then Ava's attention returned to Emily, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet focus that brought the moment into clear alignment. And Emily met her gaze, not avoiding it, not deflecting, but holding it with a steadiness that had changed since earlier, because now she understood what stood in front of her, not just authority, but accountability. And for a brief second, the space between them felt smaller, not physically, but in meaning, as if the distance created by assumption had been replaced by something more real, more direct. And Emily's voice, when it finally came, was measured, controlled, but different from before. "I understand," she said, not loudly, not defensively, but with a clarity that suggested something had shifted within her as well. And Ava gave a slight nod, not as approval, not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement. And the moment did not end with conflict. It settled into something quieter, something more lasting, as if the correction had already begun, not through force, but through awareness. And around them, the hospital resumed its motion, but not exactly as it had before. There was a difference now, subtle but present, in the way people moved, in the way they looked at one another, in the way decisions were being reconsidered even before they were made. And Ava remained where she was for one final second, her presence still, her expression composed, before turning slightly, her focus already shifting forward, toward what would come next, not as a reaction to what had happened, but as the beginning of something new that no one in that room would be able to ignore. The corridor did not return to what it had been, not completely, because something invisible had been altered in a way that could not be undone. And Ava Johnson began to walk forward, her steps unhurried, steady against the polished floor that reflected the overhead lights in long, quiet streaks. And no one stopped her this time. No one questioned her presence. The path ahead of her opening naturally as staff shifted just enough to allow her through, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. And behind her, the executives followed at a respectful distance, their presence no longer the focus, because the center of gravity had already shifted. And as Ava passed the front desk, the same space where minutes earlier decisions had been made in seconds, the energy felt different, quieter, more deliberate, as if every action now carried an awareness that had not existed before. And Emily Carter remained near the corridor, watching, her posture still composed, but her expression softened in a way that spoke of reflection rather than certainty, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again, not as opposites, not as roles in conflict, but as two people standing on either side of a moment that had changed them both in different ways, and Ava gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before continuing, not as a gesture of approval, not as forgiveness spoken aloud, but as acknowledgement that what mattered now was what came next. And somewhere deeper in the hospital, a doctor spoke calmly to a patient, a nurse adjusted a monitor with more care than before, small actions unfolding differently, because the perspective behind them had shifted, and Ava moved toward the far end of the hallway where a glass wall overlooked the city, the rain now lighter, the gray sky beginning to lift just enough to let in a thin line of sunlight that stretched across the floor, and she paused there for a second, her reflection faint against the glass, her breathing steady, her shoulders relaxed, as if the weight she carried was not a burden, but a responsibility she had already accepted long ago. And behind her, the hospital continued to move, but not blindly, not automatically. Each step, each decision now touched by the awareness of what had just been revealed, and Ava did not turn back, did not need to, because the change she had set in motion was already unfolding without her having to enforce it. And in that quiet moment, with the city stretching out beyond the glass and the soft sound of rain fading into the distance, the space between who she had been when she first walked in and who she stood as now felt both vast and seamless at the same time, and the hallway behind her held the echo of everything that had happened, not loud, not dramatic, but present, like a memory that would not fade. And as she finally stepped forward again, disappearing beyond the edge of the corridor, the silence she left behind was not empty. It was full, carrying the quiet, undeniable weight of a system that had been seen clearly for the first time and would never return to being unseen again.